Well, thank you. Thank you very much. So today we're going to talk about how open source can empower local communities and local businesses, local organizations in general. So let me tell you a bit how I got into this space. So I guess like many things in life, it was a bit of an accident, or maybe it was always meant to be. So what happened is that I was involved in many nonprofits. So I was a volunteer in some nonprofits, and we had things we were trying to do. And in a nonprofit, you have a lot of people collaborating. And this was about 20 years ago, so we didn't have the tools, as many tools as we have available today. And the main thing was how can different people in communities collaborate? And of course, there's a social part, but there's a big part which is technical. What are the actual tools? And because these were nonprofits, we didn't have a lot of money, and I didn't want to get into a point where we would pay accounts and subscriptions per user per month. That felt wrong. That supposing you had a bunch of volunteers trying to do something, and the association has a bit of money, and then it would start saying, we're going to pay accounts for these people. We're not going to pay for accounts for these other people because they're not involved enough or we don't have enough money. So I wanted a system where we could participate and that we would not have any monthly recurring fees that were per user. So I was fine with having an expense into setting up a system, but once it was set up, there shouldn't be a cost for extra users, because if we have more volunteers, that should be a good thing, not a problem, because it brings in more costs. So I started looking around for software which was free, and that's when I had discovered open source software. I had already been using open source, but I hadn't really been participating or really understood the underpinnings. And then I dug into that world and I discovered how it worked, and I started getting involved. And here we are 20 years later, where I'm working on, I founded a project in 2011 called WikiSuite, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So that's a bit my the history. But if we just go back into history, so basically I started using tools, and then instead of just using them, I was participating. I was reporting bugs, suggesting things, and I saw in certain communities when you would try to participate, the communities were very open, and it was a place where you could participate. In other places, it was a bit like you make suggestions and it doesn't really go anywhere. So I got involved in many open source projects, and over time, I felt that there was something missing. There was all these great open source platforms and communities, but they wouldn't necessarily talk to each other, and the coherence of the whole thing was lacking. So that's why in 2011, I founded the project called WikiSuite. So what is WikiSuite? So one way to look at it is, imagine if Wikipedia was trying to make software, right? So Wikipedia is a great place for knowledge. So all different types of knowledge ending up on Wikipedia in wiki pages. But that's cool for public knowledge. But what about if you have knowledge within your organization? Or what if you want to improve the way people are collaborating privately within your organization? Then Wikipedia is not the best place, because you have private confidential information. But the analogy is good. So basically, because Wikipedia is a community of people collaborating to build this common knowledge, well, we have a community building but to write software, and then this software can be reused in different ways by different members of the community. So the first thing to understand about WikiSuite is that it's a federation. It's a federation of existing, mature open source projects that each have their communities that are working well, and WikiSuite wants to help select these world-class software projects and to get them to work together. So if we would compare that, for example, in a proprietary software world, so in a commercial software world where companies will write software and sell it for licensing fees, well, if a big company, for example, is lacking, has software that does X, and then they want software that does Y, they may go out and buy a company that does that and then offer those things combined to their clients. But in an open source context, we don't need to buy projects, or we just need to collaborate. So basically, various open source projects that are doing their own thing, if they have an opportunity to work together, they can just say, hey, what you're doing is really cool. How about working together? How can we make our softwares interact? So that's basically the idea of WikiSuite, and now it's been 15 years. So I'll just go a bit through the various main components of WikiSuite and what they do. So the first one, which was in WikiSuite, and the biggest one, is called TikiWiki CMS Groupware. So that's Tiki. You could say Tiki is tightly integrated knowledge infrastructure. So it's a tool for collaboration, fundamentally. So there's wiki pages, of course, content management, so you can make websites with it, groupware, so you can collaborate, you can have teams collaborating on data. And it's a software project which started in 2002 in Argentina, and it has grown over the years, and has a community which has added a huge quantity of features over the years. Then the second one is called Dollybar. So Dollybar is about the same age, and this project started in France, and it's still very strong in France. And it's an ERP CRM accounting system. So what's an ERP? Enterprise Resource Planning. So this is a type of software. Anytime we're talking about like inventory, invoicing, accounting, all those factors, and also once you use Dollybar for your invoicing, well, you have your client list in there, or your members list. If it's a nonprofit, you'll have members. You may have membership fees, so you manage that there. And then, but you may have potential members or potential clients. So that's where the CRM parts comes in. So customer relationship management, or community relationship management. So that's what Dollybar does. Now, the third one is called SIFT. So SIFT Webmail. That's another project with over 15 years of existence. And what that does is basically aggregates email accounts. So we all have multiple email accounts, and you have to go and check them one by one, unless you have like a desktop email client. But this is a webmail, but in which you can connect multiple different email accounts. And you can even move emails from one account to the other. And it gives you a nice unified inbox. Next one is a Big Blue Button. Big Blue Button is a project started in Ottawa, Canada, over 20 years ago at Carleton University. Basically, the university needed a way for students to learn online, and there were no projects that they were happy with in terms of what was available in the open source projects. Things were not looking that good, and they didn't want to use proprietary software. So they basically said, well, why don't we help start a project? We have engineers, we have entrepreneurs in the university, so why don't we be the first big user of this software? And that's what they did. And 15, 20 years later, Big Blue Button is super popular and super powerful. And it's really dedicated for online learning. But it also does, general purpose video conferencing, and it has tons of tools. As you can expect, any software that's active for 15, 20 years ends up with a lot of features. Then the next one is SyncThing. That's for synchronizing files. So if you have files on different devices and you want to synchronize them, but it does this without a central server. So you could have 5 different computers that are not on a central server, or you could also have a central server. That's up to you. And you set different devices, and then you set different folders. So you say, okay, this folder is going to synchronize with these 4 computers. These 3 folders will synchronize with these 6 computers. And that's great for team collaboration or having backups of your own data. So for example, I have SyncThing to synchronize files between my phone and my computer. The next one is XMPP. So that's for instant messaging. So XMPP is a protocol which has multiple implementations for the server and for the clients. So for the server, we use Prosody, and for the web interface, we use Converse.js. And there are for desktop clients like Gadgem, for example. So that lets you have real-time communication, chat rooms. Now the next one, PeerTube, that's to manage videos. So if you have a lot of videos and you want a community around videos, you want to share the videos, and you want a very efficient system where you could just upload your videos and it's going to handle that really nicely, that's what PeerTube does. Another project which has been around for 15, 20 years or more. The next one is Mesh Central. That's to control devices. So imagine you have hundreds of computers you need to access. Well, you can connect to them with Mesh Central and do remote control, remote management. You can also do support. So a user, for example, needs some help. They're in front of their computer. You can connect to that computer with them and teach the user how to do something. And then the next one here, Manticore Search. So that's, once you have a lot of data, you have a bunch of different software, you're going to end up with a lot of data. So searching is really important, because if you don't have good search capabilities and your data is not well organized, what will happen is you'll end up with duplicate information and people are not collaborating on things when they should. With a good search engine, you permit convergence on the work. And the last one on this list is called Signature PDF. That's to do annotations and signatures of PDFs. So I'm just giving this list to demonstrate basically that it covers many, many things that an organization would need. So typically, any organization will need to have their own suite of various components. They're going to pick and choose different services, different software, but why not have a convergence, right? So you can pick, if you need a software, you can pick anyone in that list. But the thing is, if you need multiple softwares, well, by picking them within WikiSuite, there's more of a chance that these softwares are going to collaborate and there'll be some sort of interoperability. So what this is to demonstrate that I've worked on a lot of different types of projects and tools and use cases. And today what we're going to talk about is the importance of controlling your data, controlling your innovation, and choosing who you want to collaborate with. So the first thing, controlling your data. So you want that today, in 5 years, in 10 years, you want to control your data. That's very important, because if you don't control your data, it means someone else controls your data, some other organization. And then, well, what will they be around in 5 years, 10 years? What are what's their business model? What are they working on? So to control your data, you need to know, where is my data and which software is managing it. And the thing with data is, data is managed with software. So if you want to really control the data, you need to control the code. Now, to control the code, of course, you can buy a piece of software and it lets you work on some data. But if it's not open source, you can't be sure that that software will be available for you in the future. The license could change. The business that's running it could, go under. So if you really want to control your code, it needs to be open source. So free and open source software. Now, some people are probably thinking, yes, but if it's an open standard, I can open it with any software. And that's true. For example, emails are open standards. So you can somewhat easily migrate your emails from one system to another. And that's great. However, open standards cover a small part of all your data. If you take all your data in an organization, there's so many things that are not covered by open standards, and thus de facto they're managed by whatever software you're using. So you come back to this point where you need to control that software. So just an example, if you say, okay, well, what about timesheets? Well, there's not a standard for timesheets. There's standards for calendars, there's standards for emails, but there's no standard really for timesheets. So if you have your timesheets in one system, you say, I want to change systems, you want to export that and import another system, you'll end up with CSV files, for example, but then that won't be like very fluid and very efficient to change systems. The other thing is you want verifiable security. So you want to be able to audit your code. If you don't have the technical skills to audit your code, but you can hire people to audit your code to make sure it does what it's supposed to do. So controlling your data is the first thing. The second thing is control your innovation, because what you need today is something, but your needs will evolve. And you want to make sure that whatever is going to happen in the future, the software will follow you and will help you do what you need. So you want to adapt the software to your needs, and you don't want to depend on another organization's business model. So let's think about that. So what happens is that, let's say if we take 20 years ago, some software, what they would do is they would try to sell you licenses and say, okay, here's the software, you pay for the software, and then you would have updates for included. But a lot of software has changed to a subscription model. Well, so now you have to pay every month. So basically, the organization that was supplying the software changed its business model, and then you're stuck with it, right? So you don't want to depend on an organization's business model. And then if we take some of the big tech players, well, some are in the tool business where they're selling tools and they want to help you be more efficient. They'll sell you tools for that. But others have business models, perhaps on advertising or whatever. So you don't want to depend on another organization's business model. You want to be able to decide, here's my business model, here's my organizational model, here are my priorities, and I'm going to pick software which works for us, not for the others. And then you don't want to get locked in. You don't want to pick a software that you can't influence the future. In open source software, you can influence the roadmap, you can participate. I've started using open source software in some software packages, and eventually I became the leader of the project because, well, I was helping out, and then eventually people said, hey, you're doing a good job. So it's good to participate. Don't see yourselves as just victims or consumers or the end product. Basically, you say, look, this is software. We're all going to work together and make it better. So you have to have the mindset of a participant, of a collaborator in the ecosystem. And one of the important things to say, are things working okay, is can anybody else decide that you don't have the control, right? So in open source, you can always fork the project. So you can take a copy of the source code and say, I'm going my own way. So you always want to maintain that. And whatever you're doing, you want to make sure that nobody else can prevent you from going in a direction that you feel you want to go in. Now, another thing to be careful about is the plugins trap. So what will happen sometimes is you're going to have like open source software or proprietary software, which looks great, the price is reasonable, everything seems okay, but then they're going to have like these plugins. So what they're trying to do is to get in with something very appealing at first, but once you use the software and you have you're very committed to that software, you have a lot of data in it, then you can have these things that, oh, now you need to buy this, now you need to do that. And often what will happen is these extra things that you need later on, they'll be very expensive, even though they should not be expensive. It shouldn't be expensive to do certain things, but they know that you're locked in, so you have no choice. So you're going to pay a lot. So you have to see that it's better to pick software that has all, as many as possible of the necessary features you need. And then if anything's missing, you have to feel that, okay, if we're missing this and we don't need it right away, but we'll need it in a few years, well, when that time comes, we'll be able, either it'll be open source, someone else will have contributed to it in the community, or we'll be able to add it to the software. So back to this thing of being in control of the future and avoiding problems with plugins. Now, the other thing that's important is to choose who you're going to collaborate with. So you may decide, okay, there's certain things that are really strategic and we want to control the hosting. So we want to host this on our infrastructure. But there are other things you could say, you know what, it's not worth hosting this. So let's use open source, but let's let someone else do the hosting. And as long as they're doing a good job, we're happy. But if ever things don't work out so well or the situation changes, we're going to say we don't want that company or that supplier to be hosting anymore. We're going to bring it in-house, or we're going to get another supplier. So you want the control in the future. Again, not being locked into a vendor. You want to be able to choose who you collaborate with. The other thing is that you want to, instead of investing in license fees for purchasing software, it's best to save that money and to invest in improving the solutions. Because in the end, you may end up paying a lot in licensing. But then how is that the software really improving? And is it improving for what you need? So save that money and instead sponsor features or hire developers to add features to the software that you're using. So that's a way to, again, pick who you're collaborating with and where you're investing your resources. And then you can leverage in-house development efforts. So you can have your own developers in your organization, or you may hire external. So then it's a cost analysis, it's a flexibility thing, it's an expertise thing, but you want to keep that choice. So you always want a certain level of expertise within your organization, at least to have minimal expertise, so you're able to hire external experts and understand what they're doing and be able to guide them. You also want to be able to collaborate with upstream international communities. So typically you pick a world-class software, which has a community, which is working really well, and then you collaborate within that community. That's the best. So that was my presentation. So if you want to learn more about WikiSuite, so you can go to wikisuite.org, and then the main biggest project in that is tiki.org. And the company that I own and operate is basically evoludata.com. That is basically for services. So WikiSuite is free, everybody can use it, but there's a small percentage of the users that decide that they want support, and then they can come to evoludata.com to get services. But they don't have to, they can go anywhere they want. It's just that we actively work on that, so we're obviously experts.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Marc Laporte. So I have some questions for you. The first one is I wanted to know, like, what mistake do communities make when adopting open source?
Mm. Yeah, so I think that one of the mistakes that's often happens is to see that, okay, it's free, it's online, so that's great. So we just download it and we use it, and that's it, right? I think the mistake is to not have a relationship with the community. Is to say, okay, compared to proprietary software, it's cool because we saved some money.
Yeah.
But they don't see it as something that they can participate and that they can influence, right? It's sort of not natural. And maybe to give an analogy, let's say you're going to go and see a movie. So you go to a theater and you watch the movie. Well, you don't expect to influence the movie because you just paid your fee, you bought some popcorn and you watched the movie and then you go home, right? You had a very enjoyable 2 hours. So if you see software like that where you get the final product and that's it, then you're missing out basically. So the idea is more to see, maybe if we continued that on that movie analogy, so you could say, okay, I watched the movie, that was great, but there's going to be a version 2 of that movie and version 3. So maybe I can give ideas for the next, for the sequel of this movie, right? And then I can send in a script. Maybe I really like that movie, so I'm going to apply to be an extra, in that movie, right? So really, the mistake is to keep the mindset of just proprietary software where you just buy it and you have no say, and just say, okay, and not really switch your mind to say, if there's something wrong with the software or there's things that could be better, we can participate. And people in that, you'll find other people like you that are also using the software that will say, oh, okay, that's interesting. And often what will happen is that the suggestions you may have, well, either it could be something easy to do, but nobody thought about it. So then, okay, they're a great idea, let's do it. Or it could be, yes, we thought about that, but here's the previous discussion we had about that. So, here's where we are. And often what happens is most of the time, almost everybody agrees on what should be done. And it's just that we don't necessarily have the resources. There's not enough people to implement all the good ideas. Well, the more people there are, the more if you participate, you can act on those ideas. And if you do it on your own, well, that takes a lot of energy. But if you get together with others, you reduce the effort. So really change that mindset. That's the most important.
All right. So another question is like, so what advice would you give to emerging tech communities in Africa? So what kind of advice can you give to emerging tech communities in Africa?
All right. Very good question. So I think there's one thing would be to have to think about what happened for mobile phones, right? So there was a leapfrogging effect, right? So mobile phones, so that there was many places in Africa where landlines were never really installed, right? It went from having, no phones to mobile phones.
Right.
Whereas in other places in the world, it went from no phones to landlines and then mobile. So once you have a technology that's working, you have something that works, even if something better comes around, it's not necessarily easy to change. And there are network effects. So sometimes being the late mover can be an advantage because you could say, well, we're not going to invest in that legacy mindset or that legacy technology. We're going to go directly to the next generation. So I think there's one way of let's say we look at that and saying there were like legacy like apps from like 30, 40 years ago, and then there was the PC generation, so of sort of desktop. So a lot of things happened on desktop, and then now we're in web applications. So of course it's very rare today that you would want to invest in a desktop application. The most common thing is to say, okay, we're going to set up something on a server and people will just use their browser or perhaps even their mobile browser. So that's one way of doing it. But then where do we go, with that leapfrog? So instead of getting stuck in proprietary software, is go directly to open source and software you control, because in Africa, there's a lot of young minds and not so young minds that are available, right? There's a lot of the workforce is very available and very keen. So why spend money to buy software when you could use open source software? Save that money and then use open source software and participate and adapt it. For example, it could be adapting it to local languages, right? And adapt it to local laws. So for example, if we take something like Dollybar, which is an accounting system, well, accounting systems typically have things that are distinct from country to country. Well, that's certainly something that all countries in Africa and anywhere where this jurisdiction leads to differences in how accounting should work, well, just take open source software and adapt it. That's a good example. So then you have software which really works in your context. And if your context evolves, or as it does, well, then your developers, your local people will adapt to it. So a bit like if we give the example of Wikipedia. So Wikipedia has translations, like hundreds of languages in Wikipedia, because you have people in all these places that speak those languages and that participate, can do it. So I think it's again that thing of we need to participate. And I think there's an opportunity there because from what I've seen, there's a lot of places in Africa that things are still very manual. So a lot of processes that are pen and paper and emails. So maybe it's instead of getting locked into proprietary SaaS, now's the time to move to open source software, which is installed locally, or maintained locally, and that you participate to.
All right. So another question is, how can local developers move from being users of technology to owners and contributors?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I think is, like, every time you make a decision about software, the first thing is to say, well, it's open source by default. Now, it may not always be appropriate. There could be cases where the open source solutions have something missing, that it's not the best choice. But in general, always try to do that. Then it's about saying, okay, so especially if you're a software developer or you have access to software developers, is okay, well, how can we improve this software? What's wrong with it? What could be improved? And just have that reflex of participating. So I think that's like sort of it's the mindset.
Thank you so much, Marc Laporte. So the last question is is what role should young developers play in shaping that future?
Okay. So that's a good question, because I think it comes back to that leapfrog effect, right? So I think that when you have software developers that have been doing things in a certain way for a long time, that works for them, right? So it can be a challenge to adapt, to change to new opportunities, and that's a bit similar. I like to talk a bit about even software. So if you take older projects like we have in WikiSuite, for example, let's say Tiki. Tiki's a 25-year-old project or 24-year-old project. So, obviously when Tiki started, things were done in a certain way. And if you started Tiki today, there are some things that you would do differently. So it's always, when you have a project which has been around for a long time, when do you choose to just keep it because it works versus adapt to the new way of working? So let's give an example of a house, right? So you have an old house. It's been built 100 years ago, and it's in a prime location. But of course, it was built 100 years ago, so it was built with whatever methods and materials from 100 years ago. So then you could say, yeah, okay, but the electricity 100 years ago wasn't what we need today, so we're going to change the electrical system. So at one point, you'll probably have to do that. Then you change the plumbing system, whatever, and then you're gonna adapt your house to be up to modern standards. And you can do all that in software because it is just software, so you can always adapt it. But sometimes there are places where it's like adapting it can be quite difficult because it means changing a lot. So you may end up having to do like really a major version of software, or sometimes you may just have to say, well, we're going to stop this software and we're going to sort of continue that community in another software and make it possible for people to upgrade. So there are these trade-offs about like taking in innovation. So this is just a background to say, okay, what does that mean today for young developers? So I think what I've seen is a lot of young developers are using AI more than more experienced developers. So more experienced developers, they're used to doing things in a certain way. They've been doing it for 20 years. So even if there are new tools that come in, it's just like, okay, but what I know, this is how I know how to work. So it could be a bit more difficult to adapt to new opportunities. Whereas for younger developers, I think it can be easier. So I think it's about finding that balance, because obviously one of the things we don't want is, for example, the young developers to use artificial intelligence a lot and then to not understand what it's doing, right? So I think AI can be great to give you ideas, but you need to be able to review the code and say, okay, yes, I understand it, and okay, so the machine helped me, but this is something I could have done on my own, or now that it's done, I agree with it, and I could do it again. So I think that there are opportunities there, but it's really about participating. And if I would say, like, for a young developer, I would say the most important thing is to participate to open source projects, because you can learn stuff on your own. And I've seen this so many times that people have their own projects. They're one person on GitHub and they do stuff, and okay, you've built something, but you're not really collaborating with the community. So you're not really getting that feedback. You're not getting that real world experience. When you work on a 15 or 20-year-old open source project with a large community, okay, so the benefit there is that there's real users, right? So you can go to all these open source projects have like issues that are there. That is a really good way to learn, because it's a real issue that was reported by a real user on a mature software, and it's not just like I did something, it looks cool. Because when you build something, it always looks shiny at first.
Yeah.
Until you have a lot of users, and then the code gets a bit messy. But the thing is, if your code, if maybe because your code looks clean, but just because you have no users, right? So
Sure, sure.
it's going to happen. So you want your theory to be to collide with reality. And I think open source is a great place, because then you'll get feedback from others. You'll get the users, and you're also, the code that you're writing is open source and it's available, right? So it's also part of your CV. So for example, when I hire developers, that's probably one of the first things that I do. If not the first, it's in the top 5, where I'm going to go and see, let's see their code. What did they work on? And I can review the code. And that's really, really great, because how many other places in life can that work, right? Of course, if you're a musician, and okay, then people can go and see what you did, what music you did. For example, if you gave a concert or something. But if you're a medical doctor, well, what you're doing with patients is private, so that can't be reviewed. So working in public makes things get better, gets better feedback, and it also gives you visibility. So it's much more credible for future work that you've been doing this for 3 years. And if a developer comes to me and says, hey, can we work for you and all that, and then they have nothing on their GitHub or GitLab or anywhere else, that's a little it could happen. Sometimes maybe they have a great experience and they worked somewhere that their employer didn't let them work on open source, but that's not so great. So I think in general, as developers, of course, you can't always impose it, but ideally you would always be saying, well, telling your employer, well, I want to work on open source. So if you hire me, what I'm working on should be open source. So that's the ideal situation.
So, Mark, I noticed many developers, especially in Africa, won't like to work with you. So I wanted to know, which kind of process do you use to select some good one, or which kind of process do you use to select? Okay, even so, yeah, developers in general, not just junior or seniors. So which kind of process do you use to select?
Okay, very
The
good
last
question.
Sorry.
Very good
I
question.
have many questions, but let me end on that.
No, we have time. If you have more questions, we can take on more questions. It's all good. Okay, so let me. I'll split it in my answer in two parts. So for how it works for us. So what does my company do? Like, how can we pay developers? Big question people ask. Well, it's an open source company. It's a company that does open source. So how can you have money to pay developers? Like, how does that work? And people often are like, it's really not clear. So the answer that I'll give is a bit like, how do lawyers make money, right? The law is public, right? So anybody can go and learn what the lawyer learns. But why do you hire a lawyer? Well, because they have expertise, because they've invested the time in something. It's not that they have a specific lock-in. It's not that they have a specific advantage. It's that they did the job of understanding that part of the law, and they can spend some time on what you need them to do. So they give you advice. So what we do basically as our business model is we identify world-class open source software. So that's a big part, is picking really great software. Because of course, it's not just because it's open source that it's better than proprietary. Because if it's open source and it's not a good project and there's no community, and so you don't want to go there, right? So the same way you would say, well, even if it's proprietary or open source, you want great software. So what we do is we invest a lot of time to identify world-class open source software. And one of the criteria that we have for that is, are we going to be able to participate? Because just if the project is open source, but then it's not, the code is technically open source, but you can't participate in the community, that's not very helpful. We want somewhere where if we see a bug, we can send in a patch, We can add a feature, etc. So that's what we do. So we pick this world-class software. Then we use it for our own needs. We have a company, we run it. We have a bunch of needs, so we use that software. And this in the lingo is called dog fooding. So it's a bit like where it comes from is if a company is, for example, makes dog food, and well, you expect that they're going to feed that dog food to their own dogs. But if someone is selling dog food and they're not giving that dog food to their own dogs, then you have to wonder, right? So we use the software for our own needs. So that's how we know it works well. And if it doesn't work well, we participate to make it better. Once we have that expertise, then it's easy to tell our clients, future clients, hey, if you need help with this, we can help you. We use the software and we're satisfied and we're experts at software. So we're going to help you deploy it. So that's basically the value proposition. Now, to do that, we need experts on the software. So in some cases, people already have the expertise. So our first thing is that when we recruit people to work with us, our first reflex is to look within existing open source communities if anybody is available to work. So if there's a software that we like, ideally we say, okay, is there anybody here that's already working with software, already loves this software, and that we could hire to make it better, and or hire them to help us make it better for our clients. So that's the first thing is, so people are already active in open source projects. Why is that useful? Well, first of all, they already know the software, so that reduces our risk and our cost. The other, well, they already believe in open source because they're participating. The other thing is that they're also there's also a test of skills, because if you're working on open source, everybody sees what you do. If you don't do a good job, well, the community is going to sort of tell you, right? They're going to help you improve or give you some feedback. So think about it: if you would go to the restaurant and there's an open kitchen, and you see them make the food, right? So if you see them make the food, and if someone is preparing a steak and they drop your steak and they put it's on the floor, and then they just pick it up and put it back on the grill. Well, if they did that in an open kitchen, everybody sees that they did something wrong. But if it's closed, you don't know, you have to trust. So it's better to be able to verify. So people that work in open source and they get a lot of feedback from others, well, it gives us the confidence that the quality of what they're doing, and also the capacity to collaborate with others, because we don't each have like exact opinions of how things should be done. So we'll have different opinions, and that's fine. But we need to have people that are reasonable, that are able to negotiate and collaborate and compromise. So people that are already doing that in open source projects, well, that increases our chance that those people are going to be working well in a team within our company. So that's basically how we recruit people. The ideal way is within open source projects. That's our I guess level one, right? Now, but that's not always possible. So what happens is in some open source communities, so we've already hired all the people that are available to be hired, and anybody else that's in that community, well, they may be participating to the software, but they're already working somewhere, or they're using the software for their own needs, so they're not available to be hired.
Thank you. All
so
right.
Then what do we do next is then we say, okay, well, let's see where we can hire developers and they can learn the software. But that's more expensive for us because then they need to learn the software. And that's typically where we're going to hire like junior developers. And in our case, well, almost all of those junior developers we hire are in Africa. So now that comes to more your question of how does that work, right? So how do we hire developers in Africa, and what are we looking for? Of course, if they already have experience in open source, that's great. But in many cases, they don't really have much, or it's a bit of a GitHub account with only a few things. So that experience doesn't really tell us much. So then what do we do? Well, we have a challenge. If we have a bunch of people applying, how do we know who to hire? So what we've developed is a testing system. So first thing when people come is we have a self-serve certificates. So they can come and fill and try like doing some coding questions, and then they're going to fill out the certificates, and then that proves that they're able to do like this level 1. And that will, so if they can't code at all, well, they're not going to be able to get through level 1. Once they've demonstrated they can get through level 1, what we do is we give them some tests based on their language. On their languages, coding languages. So if someone says they're a Python developer, we'll give them a test in Python. If they're PHP, we'll give them PHP, whatever. Because even though we mostly do some PHP, we do have some needs in other languages. And if someone's a good programmer in another language, in Java, for example, we know that they'll eventually be good in PHP. So we really want good programmers, and which languages, that we can figure that out after. So what we do is we give them a a test according to what their expertise is, and then they will do the tests, and then we're going to see the results, and that's we're going to be able to see, okay, so how are you doing? And sometimes what happens is some people will do the tests and they're going to fail at first. So what we tell them is say, look, now you've had a test, so you know where you stand. This is what we expect that you need to be able to do. So go and practice, go and learn, and you can come back in like 9 months. So of course, if someone says, no, I want to come back next month, we're like, no. You need more time than 1 month to learn all this. So go back, learn your stuff.
I think this is a long subject, and I think it will be best to talk about it to the next session, because we are coming at the end of this session. Okay. So
right. Well, yes, just to conclude on that. So then people will do the tests, and then at the last step we do in-person tests. And then after, for the candidates that are selected, then we do a testing period.
Thank you so much, Marc Laporte. So as we come to the end of this session, one thing is clear. Open source is not just about technology. Open source is about people. It's about also collaboration. So it was a pleasure to have you, Marc Laporte. And I think I will invite to the next session, because we were not able to have a live session because we had some issue with YouTube Live. So Marc, thank you so much, and see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Take
care. Bye-bye.